Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, communities in northeastern Nigeria are in uproar, accusing authorities of turning a blind eye to the fate of scores of girls kidnapped from school by extremists. Many are now feared to have been forced to marry and been taken abroad. Also, Angola's president meets with France's leader in Paris as the two nations hope to move on from years of tense diplomatic relations over the arms trade scandal dubbed Angolagate. And questions remain over authorities' transparency in tackling the aftermath of a fatal train wreck in Democratic Republic of Congo. First up, just over 2 weeks since scores of Nigerian schoolgirls were kidnapped by Boko Haram extremists, locals now fear the children may have been taken into neighbouring states. Their communities are distraught as parents face agonising uncertainty, even about the number of children still missing. They say 187 are still unaccounted for. Officials say it's far fewer. The students were kidnapped in a nighttide raid from their school in Chibok, Borno State. Witnesses claim some of the girls may have been taken into Cameroon or Chad and forced to marry militants. Well, Aminu Abubakar is in Kano in the north for us. He's spoken to locals and says that it's been a nightmare for many.
Since the abduction, locals have been monitoring the movements of the captives through their sources, through many sources in villages in the northeast who have been reporting seeing these girls being moved from one camp to the other. At least there were 4 movements, and they were taken to 4 different camps before they were taken across the border into Chad and Cameroon, and authorities were informed of these movements, and nothing was done to rescue these girls. So really, parents are really outraged and blaming the government for whatever evil that befalls their children.
And what's the government said about this? We've heard a lot of expressions of outrage and solidarity from foreign governments, but what is Nigeria saying?
I mean, this is what adds to the frustration of parents, because they think that foreign governments have shown more concern about the situation of their children. They have made more statements, they've made more protests, from foreign governments than from the Nigerian government. The government of Nigeria has been silent, apart from occasional assurance that they're doing all that is possible to rescue these girls. But parents are saying that they've seen no sign that anything was being done, because there has been any report of any serious military operation to rescue the girls. And besides, they have reported several times the whereabouts of these girls, and the military have done nothing, to track down the kidnappers and rescue the girls.
Lawyers representing 15,000 Nigerian villagers appeared before judges in London on Tuesday to argue for a compensation claim brought against oil giant Shell. Members of the Bodo community say the area in Rivers State in which they live was devastated in 2 oil spills in 2008 that destroyed their farming and fishing lifestyles. A full trial is expected next year. The two sides failed to reach a compensation deal last year, as the villagers' lawyers say Shell's initial offer was insulting.
These are fishing communities where the livelihood is entirely based on the fishing industry, and since 2008 they've been effectively unable to fish, so this has caused the most terrible devastation throughout the whole of Bodo. Shell has first of all failed to bring in any sort of clean-up since it all happened, and secondly, the level of compensation that they've offered has been pitiful. So we will march on towards trial in a year's time unless we can actually get a deal.
Angola's President José Eduardo dos Santos is in France for a 2-day visit. Today, Tuesday, he met François Hollande as the two governments hope to smooth over years of tense diplomatic relations rooted in the so-called Angolagate scandal of arms trafficking from France to the African nation. Nicolas Romain has more.
The Angolan president hadn't been in France for 13 years. The aim of the 2-day visit is to normalise the relationship after years of tension. François Hollande said a few words before journalists were chased out of the room.
Mr. President, I was very happy when I heard you were coming to France. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
At the heart of the diplomatic spat was the scandal called Angolagate. French judges said businessman Pierre Falcon and Arcadie Guédamac and former French minister Charles Pasqua sold weapons to the Angolan government without authorization from the French authorities.
They have absolutely no evidence.
Pasqua was sentenced to 1 year in jail, but he appealed and the charges were dropped. The businessmen involved in the scandal were close to President dos Santos, and this court case harmed French companies who wanted to invest in Angola. But a 5-hour visit in 2008 by Nicolas Sarkozy helped improve ties. Now, France is the third biggest foreign investor in Angola, and trade between the two countries represented 1.3 billion euros last year. Angola is Africa's second largest oil producer after Nigeria, and the main oil company operating in the former Portuguese colony is the French firm Total. This last decade, Angola had on average a growth rate of 10% per year, but the nation ranks only 148th out of 187 in the UN's Human Development Index. On Tuesday, after his meeting with Hollande, dos Santos, who's been in power since 1979, invited his French counterpart to come to Angola.
The split in Zimbabwe's political oppositions deepened as Morgan Tsvangirai's MDC party voted to oust a faction within its members. The Movement for Democratic Change expelled ex-finance minister Tendai Biti. He'd been amongst those who'd called for a more fierce opposition to President Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF party. Well, Tsvangirai insists that his loss of 3 successive elections to Mugabe were down to vote rigging and has been scathing in his dismissal of Biti.
That he believed in something all along. The man does not, he deceived us all. The man does not believe in anything except his power, like Welshmen, except their power and their egoistic positions. And as I said, you know, they formed their own party. We wish them well. This is a democratic country. Any party is allowed to associate with whoever they want to associate. But they cannot pretend that they are MDCT.
Congolese authorities have been accused of trying to hide the true number of deaths from a train crash last week. The official death toll was given as 74, but local Red Cross claims that hundreds of bodies were placed in mass graves.
Days in the mangled wreckage of the freight train, which was bursting with illegal passengers when it flew off the rails in a swampy and inaccessible part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. 6 days after the train crash, there are still 9 carriages to be searched for bodies and possible survivors. Between 100 and 200 victims of the crash were buried in mass graves, casting doubt on the official death toll of 74. The Red Cross said at least 100 bodies had been taken from the train and buried because there is no morgue.
We are putting the derailed cars back on the railway line, and it's possible that we find more bodies, or maybe even injured people. We must wait until the carriages are lifted onto the rails before we can confirm the death toll.
Witnesses said the train was carrying hundreds of passengers, many of whom had paid an illegal reduced fare to ride the train. Train crashes are fairly frequent in DR Congo, where the railway lines were built under Belgian colonial rule. The World Bank is currently financing a program to refurbish the network, but the money may have been misappropriated.
The money could not have been misappropriated because World Bank projects follow certain procedures involving how the money can be spent, how the workers are selected. These are linked to World Bank regulations, which are very strict and which are reviewed every 2 years by the bank to be improved.
The World Bank project to renovate the railway lines in DR Congo cost $219 million. Last week's train disaster proves that these renovations are urgently needed.
Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta signed into law a controversial marriage bill legalizing polygamy. It brings civil law, where a man was only allowed one wife, into line with customary law allowing multiple partners. Controversy surrounded an amendment to the bill supported by many male MPs, allowing men to take more wives without consulting existing spouses. Well, last month, female MPs walked out of Parliament in disgust after their male counterparts voted through the change. Well, Kavinia Makau from rights organisation Equality Now is in Nairobi, and that group's been fighting the changes to the marriage legislation. It says today is a step back in the battle against discrimination.
Foremost, there is an obligation to have laws that do not go against justice and morality, and again, our constitution is very clear in terms of if you have marriages such as polygamous unions, which are recognized by law, these have to be consistent with the Constitution. And as I have just mentioned, parties to a marriage are entitled to equal rights during the marriage and, of course, when it is dissolved. And this is something that is, of course, outlined in our Constitution.
Now, this isn't where you're going to leave it, is it? You plan on continuing to explore avenues to try and change this?
Definitely. We will be seeking ways for which to amend the offending provisions of this law. We are also going to seek judicial avenues so that we can at least have a law that really protects and advances the rights of women in the context of marriage.
Well, that wraps up African News. I'll be back, though, with more tomorrow. Join us then if you can. Take care.